And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for staying tuned to the second hour of the show. Don't forget, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by SoulHealer.com and the Institute of Applied Energetics. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com, where you too can learn to become a medical intuitive counselor, or certified energy medicine practitioner. That's www.appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. Do check out the archives at justenergyradio.com. Sign up for our newsletter or go to our YouTube page and check out the shows there. In a couple of weeks, we will be hitting our 7th year of broadcasting, and so all of those archives are available on the Just Energy Radio website. March 22nd through 30th, ancientmysteriesinternational.com and Angkor Wat. Check it out, ancientmysteriesinternational.com, March 22nd through 30th. So in this hour, we're going to be speaking to a good friend, Lyle Blackburn, about his new book, The Lizard Man. So let me tell you a little bit about Lyle and get him on the air. Lyle Blackburn is a frequent contributor and cryptozoology advisor to Rogue Morgue magazine, one of the leading horror media publications in print today. Lyle's Monstro Bizarro blog is featured on Rogue Morgue's website, and his Monstro Bizarro Presents news column appears monthly in the print magazine. He has also contributed to websites such as Cryptomundo.com and has been a featured speaker at paranormal conferences and horror conventions around the country. So from www.lyleblackburn.com. Lyle Blackburn. Hey, Lyle, how's it going?
Hey, going good.
Well, it's always nice to hang out with you. I just want to know, are you wearing the cool hat?
No.
Lie to me, Lyle. Lie to me.
Well, no, but check it. I'm not wearing my signature black cowboy hat, but I'm wearing a camo hat that is embroidered with the words Bigfoot Research on it. So, it's like a one-of-a-kind hat.
Okay. At least it's got crypto stuff on it.
Yeah.
So your new book, The Lizard Man, when did that come out?
On Halloween.
Ooh, how cool is that?
Yeah, the coolest release day, for a month book, I'm sure.
So, what makes the story of the Lizard Man from Bishop County so important?
Well, it's one of those cases, the Bishopville Lizard Man, that you read about in a lot of cryptozoology books. And it appears in a lot of these books. Sometimes it's, a few paragraphs, sometimes maybe a chapter. But it's certainly one of the more famous cryptozoology cases because one of the eyewitnesses in this case, a young man, claimed that this thing basically attacked him and he barely got away by zooming off in his car. So, when you read that, it always stands out. So I always remembered this case, and it brings up a lot of questions when you start talking about lizard men, of course, and even in relation to cryptozoology, cryptids, and things like that. So what I discovered by some research and by going to Bishopville, South Carolina, and things like that, I discovered there's a whole lot more to the story that I'd ever read about, just how this all unfolded and the crazy media stuff that went on. And, as well, it's just an interesting concept or creature. And so once I started looking into it more, then I realized, wow, it's a great story, and I think it would be a good follow-up for my Beast of Boggy Creek book. So,
cool. So what does this lizard man supposedly look like?
Well, the descriptions, not unlike other cryptid cases, it varies a little bit from witness to witness. But in general, majority of them described it as being maybe 7 foot tall, bulky, humanoid shaped, walking on two legs. It's said to have glowing red eyes, and possibly had like 3 fingers and 3 toes. A few of the witnesses said they thought it had a tail. And then a crop of witnesses who said they believed it had hair and would almost be more in the realm of a Bigfoot. So, but in general, kind of a scaly, brownish, greenish kind of creature.
Okay. I had a question in my head, but it left, so I'll just move. That happens sometimes. I start listening and then I forget. So is the case that happened in Bishopville County an isolated incident, or do stories of this lizard man go back far back in time?
Well, in that general area, and what I did, and of course in the process of researching the book, was to, look at other possible sightings of a creature with this description that have occurred in the past. And what we're talking about is sightings that started in 1988 here. It was kind of a flash fire. It was a lot of sightings at once, and the creature sort of appeared after several years. But in researching this, I did find that there was some Native American stories from tribes in that area that described meeting a race of men, as they called it, that had scaly skin, and they had tails, and these tails were about a foot long, and they were rigid. They weren't, flexible tails like you would think of, a lizard or something, but these hard tails, and they existed by eating fish. And when the fish ran out, they left the area. So it was kind of, odd that the natives in the area had described such a lizard man type creature. And of course, their descriptions are very vague. So you can't really compare what it looks like to the modern sightings. But, if you also start looking into North America as a whole, you find that there have been a handful of sightings of what we could call scaly humanoids, or reptilian humanoids, or even amphibious type humanoids that you can compare to. And there's been sightings of those, in various places across the U.S. So there have been other sightings of the lizard man, although in some regards the Bishopville lizard man would be the most famous of those creatures.
Okay. But in this current case, or in the Bishopville case, didn't they find some physical evidence?
Yeah, it was funny how it all got started, because the first thing that happened in July 1988 was the sheriff's office got a call from some people who lived in this area near a place called Scape-Ore Swamp, a remote swampy region. And they said that they had gotten up in the morning and found that their car had been mauled. Apparently, it looked like it was chewed up, maybe by an animal. And there was fur and footprints leading off into the swamp and things like that. And so a couple of deputies went out there, and he looked at it like, I don't know. So they called the sheriff and said, "You better get down here. This is really weird." And so the sheriff goes down there, and in the process of trying to figure out if this car had actually been, vandalized by an animal, some of the locals came up and said, maybe it was the lizard man. And he's like, "The lizard man? What do you mean?" People in this area lately have been seeing something that we refer to as a lizard man. And then, they described it as I described it before. And so, that's how it all kind of got started and rolling, and the police started trying to find the people who had seen it and, get the witness statements. But so you had this car. There was no direct link necessarily to the lizard man, but it was some sort of evidence. And there's been at least 3 cases like this over the years, and one recently, only a few years ago, in which the car has been mauled. There was also some tracks found back in 1988, which were 3-toed tracks. However, those tracks, in my estimation, are quite hokey and, really didn't come from a real animal. So I don't think those really apply here as far as hard evidence. But in general, there was some evidence. The police did look into this case thoroughly and somewhat seriously. I mean, they tried to just figure out what it was, whether it was a was it a hoax or some unidentified animal in the area. They just looked into it. So it was cool that they had kept some police documents and records that I had access when I researched the book.
So there was actually more than one incident that happened in that basic geographic area.
Right. Once it came out in the paper about that car mauling, that brought forth the first witness, basically, who this guy's father brought him down to the police station and said, "My son has a story you should know that maybe has to do with this so-called lizard man." And this teenager, Christopher Davis, who was 17 at the time, said that he had had a flat tire near Skateboard Swamp several weeks before. And while he was in the process of changing this tire, he was just about finished, and he saw something coming at him through the fennel grass. There was enough moonlight to see that, make out the shape. It sort of looked like a human running at him, but then he realized, I don't think this is a human. It's some kind of a scaly creature, and obviously he panicked. He jumped in the car, tried to get it started. This thing tried to get in. It even jumped on top of the car as he sped off, and he just sort of barely got away. And so when he did, presented his story to the police, the police did what they would do in any case like this, is try to figure out if the kid's telling the truth. By their estimation, he was. They totally believed that something happened to this kid. And following that, several other sightings, and then some other people that came forward saying they had seen it previously, a couple of years prior to that. So it established, at least a short span of time in which people were seeing this creature. And so there's, several sightings which are not only compelling, but just downright spooky.
Yeah, no kidding. So there was a question in the chat room. And so I'm just going to read two different pieces. It says, was there any DNA found at the site or any other type of evidence, which you kind of covered. But then there was kind of a follow-up comment. If it attacked a car, you would think there would be some kind of residue. So, I mean, was there any kind of fingerprints or anything that was left on the metal surfaces?
There was. Now, when we talk about the one in 1988, where the police looked into it, the first case on that car, they were pretty sure some animals were involved. They found hairs from a fox, and they weren't sure. It appeared that some other animal was fighting with that animal, but they did find hairs and things, but they didn't do any kind of DNA at that time, because in 1988 those tests were really expensive, and they're certainly not going to do them unless it was a murder case or something else. Now later on, we passed like 2008, where there was another case. Now at this point, DNA tests are a lot cheaper, and they did do one on that car, and the results came back that it was a canine. Of course, the police...
Oh, so it was the chupacabra.
Yeah, so we've implicated another cryptid. But the police, they saw the car, and they're just like, dude, there's no way a dog did this, or biting right through the metal and this sort of thing. So there was, and then the people who said, the people who owned the car said, well, we did drive the car around, prior to them actually swabbing it, and there was some blood that was on it, and they thought, well, maybe our neighbor's dogs, got up and tried to lick the blood. So there was a possible contamination scenario, and, the police didn't really believe it was a canine. So, but, I mean, they did run the DNA for that. And then several years later, when the third car comes up, the police they just didn't run another DNA test. They were just like, hey, we don't know. Maybe it was the lizard man. They just kind of weren't interested after that. So, but that's the evidence that we have so far.
Always so interesting. What the government or those important people decide to do.
Right.
So,
I mean, it's a small, it's a small county. I mean, Bishopville's a really small place, so of course, budget there for fancy DNA is, I guess they got to pick their battles.
so let's talk geographically speaking. Is Bishopville isolated? I mean, because it sounds like, people that have Bigfoot sightings or this kind of sighting and that kind of sighting, they always seem to be in some remote, out of the way, nowheresville. So, I mean, does Bishopville fall into that category also?
Yeah, it does, and especially in 1988. It's not as much now. They built Interstate 20 somewhat close to Skateboard Swamp. It runs through part of it now, so it's not as isolated as it was. But in 1988, I mean, it's just a small town, and all the sightings took place outside of town in this area of Skateboard Swamp. And Skateboard Swamp is just one of those uninhabitable, boggy areas where it's very thick and rugged and inhospitable, and would be a likely place to see a large animal. And I mean, in fact, there's been sightings of large cats and other things out in there. And moonshiners back in the day would pick this as a place to hide out because nobody went in there. It just was that remote. So I think that it would logically be a place where you would see a large animal. So it's not too far fetched. But sightings have dwindled, and there's none now. But that might make sense because it's more well developed. If there was an animal there, it might have moved on because, as civilization encroaches, they've got to go further into other places to get away. So, pretty good area. And I did go back into Skateboard Swamp when I was out there when I do my books. I definitely like to try to, go there, and that way I can, give the experience to the reader and really paint a picture of what this place looks like and what it's like, to get a better idea of whether, it would be plausible.
In this case, you're talking about this swampy kind of area, in the Boggy Creek. Obviously, we're talking about a watery kind of swampy area. You have this thing about watery, swampy areas. I don't know why.
Oh, yeah. No, that's not the whole of it. When I started doing research for this book, actually, I went on what I call the swamp tour, in which I went all through the southeast, going to large and or famous swampy areas that had a history of strange occurrences and cryptid sightings. So I've been in Honey Island Swamp. I went to Okefenokee Swamp in Georgia. And in the process of doing all that, when I visited Skateboard Swamp on my swamp tour, that's when I kind of started seeing that there was a whole lot more of that story. So, yeah, I don't know what it is, but I just love those. I just love the swamp areas and kind of the spooky tales associated with it. And I also like to travel waterways because it's a way to really get into remote areas and to move quietly and efficiently. So, a lot of times I just by default go to an area where there's swampy terrain so that I can take my canoe and really go back into the deep parts of these areas. So, yeah, I'm definitely a swamp kind of guy, I suppose.
Well, they just asked in the chat room, hey, can we call him the Swamp Man?
Well, I don't know.
Maybe not.
Those guys pulling alligators out of the water. See, I don't do that. I just leave the alligators be. I just,
You just take notes.
I look at them, I nod, it's sort of a truce, and I go on by. I'm like, hey, I'm looking for Bigfoot and Lizard Man. You're cool. So I don't know, I can't compete with the swamp guys that do that, but I guess I do go in the same places. So.
In the other stories of lizard man type sightings, is there always this swampy type situation going on, a water situation going on?
Yeah, it is an underlying current, so to speak, in a lot of these lizard man type cases. Not always a swamp, but definitely a river or something involved. There was a famous sighting in the 1950s out in Riverside, California, in which this guy Charlie Wetzel claimed that he saw a creature kind of fitting this description run up from the Santa Ana River and cross the road. So, here it is. It's coming out of this river, and then you have a lot of sightings along the Ohio River. There's several cases like this up and down that waterway. There was one in 1966 in Stephensport, Kentucky, which was near a place called Seeking Creek. And this guy, when he was younger, literally described almost like a creature from the Black Lagoon type of thing near this creek. So, definitely these creatures are seen in and around water. And I'm not even the first one to put these pieces together. I mean, guys like Warren Coleman for years had kind of been seeing this trend with these kind of swamp creatures in the water. So. I'm just adding more, to the story, so to speak. But yeah, it's definitely a theme.
So one of the other things that seems kind of consistent in these stories, or that's interesting, is the whole idea of the red eyes. I mean, in the animal kingdom, there, as far as I'm aware of, aren't any animals with red eyes. I mean, you might correct me on that point, but that just seems bizarre.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting how you do get reports of the red eyes. I mean, you get that with Bigfoot accounts as well. And it's certainly in this case. And the whole red eye thing definitely seems kind of monstrous, So, I mean, there's a lot of theories with bioluminescence. And, if this is indeed some unknown animal, it could have a bioluminescence that gives off a red color. I mean, one of the cases where a witness that had seen the lizard and said it had red eyes was when a car was passing by. This car, its headlights hit the thing, and it said its eyes glowed red. So this guy seemed pretty confident about what he saw, and he felt that the red color was the right color. So I just don't know how to add that up, but it sort of all falls into that unexplained, unknown animal category to say, well, if they do exist, then it's possible that their eyes glow red, but it doesn't occur in nature, with most animals. So I don't know, unexplained.
Well, and I'm just going to throw this out. I know that with my little personal chupacabra, if the light hits her eyes in a certain way, they turn red. They look kind of red. So could it be some kind of reflection, because of light hitting their eyes?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a light source, that could, I mean, an artificial light source of some kind, like when you take a photo of somebody and their eyes look, suddenly look like a demon, I mean, they don't have red eyes. It was just something about the flash and something about the spectrum of light. So in the case where the car passed by and got on its eyes, it could have been a reflection from something else. So its eyes weren't actually projecting a red. They were just reflecting a red hue. So, I mean, that's possible. And I suppose if, a hunter shines a light or something like that, or if it's seen in the dark with any artificial light source, then, it could be red. So, it's not out of the question.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Need to get one. Oh, wait, still don't have a Bigfoot. So.
Well, yeah, that will answer all these questions. It's all just hypothetical suppositions until if there's a body laying here, boy, I could tell you note for note what's up with it.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. So, I mean, we kind of talked about this, but there are lizard men that have been spotted in other areas. So when you look at the descriptions of those lizard men, do they seem like it might be, I don't want to say the same creature, but like from the same species, classification? Is there a reasonable amount of consistency that's happening between those type of reports, description-wise?
No, unfortunately not. I saw that there was some discrepancies that led me to believe that they weren't really the same type of creature. They would be like, take the Thetis lake monster, for example. This was a case where people had seen a creature near Thetis Lake in British Columbia back in about 1972. The creature there was described as being shorter. It had, some like spikes coming out of its head and things like that. And these are definitely things not described in the Bishopville case. There's in the case that I talked about in the 1950s, in which the guy saw something run across the road near Riverside, California. He said the thing looked like its mouth was sort of like a beak. He did say it had scaly skin and things like that, but its mouth is beak-like. And again, I didn't get any of that from the Bishopville case. So there always seemed to be one conflicting detail to suggest that these were not the same type of creature being seen in the same places. And then there's a whole slew of descriptions of really brief sightings, like in New Jersey and New York and things like that just don't have enough description to really make a decision to whether, it's like the Bishopville lizard men or not. So it falls short in the realms of accurate description and just not enough data to be able to say for sure whether this would be the same type of creature or some of these people mistaken or, it's just a mystery.
So if you were to compare like Bigfoot sightings to lizard man sightings or chupacabra sightings to lizard man sightings, I mean, which would you say has been seen more often?
I mean, Bigfoot by far. I mean, there's just more and more sightings coming to light, whether they're new sightings or just ones that nobody's really presented to the public. There are just so many Bigfoot sightings that far outnumbers any sort of sightings by other cryptids. Chupacabra sightings, I mean, depending on what chupacabra we're talking about, but the one that could be some sort of hybrid canine or Mexican wolf or whatever it is. I mean, there's a lot of sightings of that in recent years, in Texas and areas like that. Lizard men, that starts getting lower. There's just less sightings of those. Just stranger. And then you start getting into other things that straddle the line between cryptid and paranormal, like the Mothman. Usually these things happen in waves and, it's here and it's for a year or two and it's gone. So, but whereas, Bigfoot, you just continually get credible reports coming in at all times. So, I think Bigfoot wins.
Bigfoot wins. Well, okay.
I don't know what he wins, but he wins in numbers of credible sightings.
He wins in press activity.
Yes.
And let's talk, since I brought the topic up, what happened after they had the sightings in Bishopville? Then what happened?
Well, when it originally happened, and of course when this Christopher Davis went down there and told the sheriff of his sightings, it didn't take long before the news and media got word of that, and it was all over the newspapers. It was on the radio. It really snowballed, and as a few other people came forth claiming that they had seen it, this thing just exploded quickly. NBC Nightly News covered it. The CBS News, Dan Rather did a piece on it. People magazine was there, CNN, it was in Time magazine, it was in the Korean Times. I mean,
Korean Times?
I mean, it was all over. In fact, the Oprah Winfrey Show had contacted Christopher Davis. She was going to bring him on the show. It never happened, but I mean, for the Oprah Show to even be interested in a kid who claimed to see a lizard man is just insane. And so, immediately following those sightings in the summer of '88, it was just this humongous media frenzy. Then, of course, nobody's coming forth with a lizard man photo or a body, so, the press is going to lose interest. They kind of moved on. And then following that, then the sightings, weren't highly publicized. And that's one reason when I go and research these cases, I'm finding sightings that nobody's really ever written about in great detail because, this is after the news media moved on. So if you want to find these sightings, you got to go out there and start talking to locals. And so, that was another interesting fact about the whole case. And, obviously something that's covered in the book is just the insane amount of media coverage that happened in regard to this case. And then what are those subsequent sightings? What are the details? Because, it's certainly sensational, the sighting that Christopher Davis nearly got attacked, but there's some of the later sightings were even just as spooky, in which the creature lunged at a car full of 5 people and things like that. So yeah, it was definitely interesting and one of those cases where it got a lot of media attention. And like I said, the police had investigated it, and so that was a plus in being able to find old records, because they had affidavits and written statements detailing what these witnesses had seen that was recorded a couple of days after their sighting. So as opposed to me interviewing somebody who had a sighting 30 years ago, I could literally read what they saw, while it was fresh in their mind, and as well I could compare each witness together in what they described, because it was seen by multiple people at one time. So that was cool. And definitely, I actually reprinted some of those police documents in my book. I got permission to do that. So it's pretty cool just to see these things written out on, in police reports.
So how did the town take it? We both go to Jefferson, Texas for the History Haunts, spooky Jefferson, Texas for the History Haunts and Legends Conference. And it seems like in that town, because it's a pretty small town, that some of the people are okay with the ghost stuff. And then there's this whole other big group that's not so okay with the whole ghost paranormal thing. How did Bishopville take, having that kind of, off the wall weird celebrity attached to it?
Well, it's kind of the same like that. I see the same pattern in all these small towns where some of the people, have fun with it or roll with it or believe there's something to it. And then you got a lot of them that just think it's silly and don't want to be associated with anything of the sort. I saw that in my Beast of Boggy Creek book with the Fouke Monster. Same kind of deal. You got a few people in town that, make the best of it, or there's a place called the Monster Mart and things. And then you got a whole slew of people that don't want a monster story. So it's kind of the same across the board. In Bishopville, there's the South Carolina Cotton Museum, and if you go in there, they have a little section for the lizard man because it is a part of their history. And so these historians that run that museum, the curator, they recognize it, whether it's real or not. It is a part of the history. And if you search Bishopville, South Carolina, it's probably within the first 2 hits, it's going to say Bishopville Lizard Man. So they can never get out, they can never disassociate themselves with this creature. So they might as well just make the best of it, in my opinion. There's some restaurants there that say Home of the Lizard Man, and they've got a Lizard Man sandwich on the menu. They have fun with it. So it's great it's great to see that. I mean, they're not trying to make a lot of money off of it or anything. They're not making this up to make money. As some of them remarked, just like we couldn't even have made this up as a publicity stunt. It just happened. It just seems it was just something they could never conceive of until it actually happened. So it's kind of made Bishopville famous, for a monster, and but it's still something that is not regarded by some of the people there as being something they want to be associated with.
Well, I had gone to, excuse me, Bermuda on a vacation. And, well, you know me, Lyle. I got to find the weird stuff. So I was looking for like little plastic keychains that were shaped like a triangle that said Bermuda.
Yeah.
Like souvenir things, but they had to be triangles that said Bermuda. So then I could bring all of my friends Bermuda triangles. Not one Bermuda triangle in Bermuda.
Really? Yeah, that's surprising. I mean, it's funny because it's just like it is. It's a marketing campaign that you can't compare to. It's. I don't understand why they don't just make the best of it. But I mean, and you see places like, I guess like Roswell. It took them many years before they actually decided they could capitalize on it. And you go there now, and of course you can find all kinds of souvenirs. But sometimes I guess it just takes time before these towns come around. And in fact, since I wrote my Beast of Boggy Creek book, when I first went there was not a lot of signs of the Fouke monster there. But since the book has come out and we've done, 2 or 3 TV shows that feature the Fouke monster, now the Monster Mart there has this huge, like, Bigfoot head on the front of the building, and there's a little museum inside there where you can see some old newspaper clippings and some things that I've donated to be on display now. And so it's really, they really said, hey, this is part of our local heritage, and whether it's a legend or it's a real creature, it's still a part of our local story. So, it's cool that they acknowledge that and try to offer something to look at, because people come from all over, to visit these places looking for these creatures. In fact, even Bishopville, people come down there looking for the lizard man. TV shows are still running, shows on it. So it's a mystery as to why some of these people don't just make the best and capitalize. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. It's not like they made this up. They're just adding to it. And tourists like you and me, I'd have been doing the same thing. I'd have been looking for some souvenir, say, hey, I went to the Bermuda Triangle. Here I got this, the souvenir.
Triangle.
I got this, yeah, right. My mom.
The only thing that I saw there was that, book, the Bermuda Triangle, that was in one store, and it was a really old copy that they had in the window. That was it.
Wow, I find that surprising, but because it's obviously people find it fascinating because there's
it's
TV
very
shows
there, very there, and they're very uptight. That's where you have to wear like Bermuda shorts, and there really is a dress code. That you can only wear your bathing suit on the beach, and if you're on the street, you got to wear the long shorts, and they're pretty up.
So, I see. Okay.
Anyway, but no triangles.
No triangles.
No triangles. And I don't know if you know anything about this, but I'm going to throw it out there. In instances with the lizard man in general, or even Boggy Creek, has there been any UFO activity reported around the same time?
There was only a few scantily related reports in either case that had to do with UFOs. I've got a lot of sightings from the Boggy Creek area, and none of them, in no case did any witness say they had seen a UFO prior to that at all. Some of the witnesses did say they had seen something in the sky on a different night. Two different witnesses told me that, but it wasn't related to, then seeing a sighting that night. In the Bishopville case, none of the witnesses that had seen the creature said anything remotely having to do with UFO sightings, although there's one witness report that's always associated with this case. It's like always on the Wikipedia and stuff. And in that case, supposedly a woman had seen a UFO and there was two lizard men, but the police determined she was just out of her mind. So I just disregard that one. So I guess this is a long way of saying there's not really any UFO sightings in conjunction with these cryptids. Okay.
I mean, because who was I talking to? Someone, but it was more tied to Bigfoot that, not necessarily, parallel, but, within a few days before or after there had been some UFO activity in some of the cases. So I just thought I would.
Yeah. Well, that is certainly in some cases, there is a lot of that kind of thing going on. I mean, if you look at the research Stan Gordon has done in the Pennsylvania area, there was a flap of time, I think it was in the 70s, in which there was just a lot of crazy activity going on and reports of UFOs, and at the same time reports of, upright, hairy creatures, ape-like creatures fitting the description of Bigfoot in the area. So, it's certainly something that comes up, but I guess in the cases I've researched, they didn't.
Okay. Just was curious. So what do you think this thing is?
Well, and of course I try to cover the various theories as to what it may be. One of my personal favorite theories is that it could be a Bigfoot. I mean, I know it's kind of crazy to explain one cryptid using another, but in this case, the lizard man, admittedly is more of a biological impossibility. It's more of a fantastic creature. So if we're just talking, unknown animal to unknown animal, Bigfoot obviously seems a lot more plausible as being an undiscovered ape. And since some of the witnesses in the Bishopville case described it as having hair, or thought it had hair, I thought, well, it's not to say that the people who had seen it and thought it was scaly, perhaps it was covered in mud or dried mud, or perhaps it was wet from being in the swamp. So it's not out of the question that those people had seen a Bigfoot and just in their local, they just called it the lizard man. And once that name sticks, then it doesn't matter if you see a Bigfoot, it's going to be the lizard man because it's in this area. And that's really kind of what happened, is it was given that name. But as I really looked at the cases, I thought, it's possible they saw a Bigfoot and, it just got lumped under the heading of lizard man. Now, that's just one possibility. I mean, that's not to say that it couldn't be a reptilian humanoid, but if you're starting to go in that direction, there's a whole lot more assumptions that have to be made. So if it is a reptilian humanoid, I'm at a loss of what that could be. A highly evolved dinosaur, I mean, that's another possible explanation, and some people do subscribe to that theory, but it just seems hard to believe that one dinosaur happened to escape extinction and then evolved enough to look like a human. You start really taking a lot of leaps. Not impossible, but more improbable. So, and then of course you always got the old, it was a crash circus train or whatever, exotic animal running loose. I'm like, well, they didn't call this thing the camel man or the bear man, so I don't think it's a circus animal. Which circus have I been to that I saw a lizard man? None. I mean, there's sideshows that have had people with that skin condition, ichthyosis, but I mean, it's, what dude is going to be running naked through the swamp? It's like, it doesn't add up. But bottom line, there's a lot of different ways you can go with explanations and what this might be. And I just, in my books, of course, I try to present all sides and all theories and as much data as I possibly can, so that as a group, as everybody who's interested in this can look at it and maybe draw some conclusions or add to it and go from there. Because, I certainly don't have any definitive proof, so I can't ultimately say what it is. I just try to get as close as I can.
Well, I mean, so I was reading, and I think it was the Dulce book. I don't know. It was one of those, books about the underground bases at Dulce and the reptilians, and it might not have been the Dulce book, but one of those. And what was interesting in reading your book and kind of comparing notes was that the description that you gave, especially the part about the red eyes, I mean, that really stuck out, was like what came out of that book. That they talk about these creatures like climbing in your window, and the biggest thing that went across all of them was the red eye phenomena. And I think that that book was from in the 90s, but it was like people's eyewitness reports, but they're tying it more toward this whole alien thing and underground bases and, control of our mind and everything. And you're coming at it from a totally different angle, but it's still, they kind of collide.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I definitely went at it as a cryptozoology case, because here you have, all I have to work with is witnesses who say they've seen it, in a swampy area where animals live. Nobody ever said they saw it coming from the ground or from an underground bunker. Nobody ever said they saw a cave or it messed with their mind. So I couldn't come, in this case, I couldn't come at it from that angle. Although certainly they both lead back to the same place in a way. Where you can go off on a lot of tangents and theories that get involved in, extraterrestrial or these subterranean lizard people. Now, one thing I did look at was, are there cave systems in South Carolina, in which, not to say there aren't some undiscovered, but there's really not that many caves out there. So I'm thinking, if this was one of those underground dwelling people, what the heck was it doing out there? Because, this isn't a system of caves, presumably, that would lead them and give them reason to be roaming around in a swamp in South Carolina. I mean, if they're trying to infiltrate our society and shapeshift and get in the government and do all that, this is the last place the thing would need to be. They need to be somewhere else. So I just kept it as a cryptozoology case. And since, of course, I've read about it in cryptozoology books all over the place, I thought, well, I'm just going to tell the complete story of this cryptid as I know it to be. And then again, if it connects somewhere in there to that, the other case where they're talking about subterranean reptile men, well, now we just have more, knowledge about sightings.
Mm-hmm. The Chris Davis, that was his name, Chris Davis, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So how credible of a witness was he?
Well, I mean, he was a kid. I mean, 17 years old at the time. He's not an upstanding citizen or with a long track record or anything like that. But I'm 99% positive that kid saw something. And the reason, and I'm usually not that positive, but the reason I am is because, one, his father was there when the kid came home, and his father was a well-respected citizen, and he brought him down to the sheriff's office, and his father vouched for him. He said, my son was upset that something happened to him. And, backed up his story. Now, Sheriff Truesdale, the guy that interviewed him, this guy has got training. I mean, he worked us in the Lee County Sheriff's Office. It was a smaller police organization, but he had He's a degreed guy. He's got FBI training. This guy was no slack investigator, and he interviewed him several times. They also gave him a lie detector test, and even to this day, Truesdale said, I know that kid saw something. I can guarantee you. And so he felt it was, and again, this kid had no reason to make up this story. I mean, it basically ruined his life. He was not
because of the notoriety, or because of like the PTSD.
Well, yeah, the notoriety of just like now, everybody wants to know about the sighting, and he's telling it till he's blue in the face, and now forevermore he's just known as the kid who saw the lizard man. It wouldn't go away, and I think the kid had problems. Ultimately got into drugs years later and ended up getting shot in his house. His family was in there. 2 guys walked in with shotguns and just shot him in the kitchen and walked out. The guy had a terrible life. Prior to that, though, he was a promising basketball player, got good grades. He worked a job in high school. I mean, he worked at McDonald's. I mean, he was working. He was a good kid. So I'm quite positive he saw something that night. He never recanted it. He never came back and said, look, quit calling me the lizard man, boy. I never saw that. I mean, he stuck by the story, and the police backed him up. And, I've talked to so many people that knew stuff about this that I believe he definitely saw something. That was another, hinge point of the case. Like, we can't say what he saw, but it's for sure he saw something strange.
Lyle, I just looked at the clock, and we have to go. So if somebody wants to get a copy of your book, The Lizard Man, where do they go?
Best place to go is my site, lyleblackburn.com. You can start there. I've got links to wherever you'd like to purchase it. It's available on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, all flavors of Nook and Kindle, and ebook on iTunes. So just hit up my site, and it will navigate you to the book of your dreams.
Ooh. Sparkly. That was perfect. That was perfect.
More like the book of your nightmares.
Either. It depends on how twisted your mind is. Anyway, Lyle, I'm going to let you go. Thanks so much for coming on, and blessings to you and your family. And I'm sure I will be talking to you soon.
I'm sure. Thanks for having me. I will talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye. That's Lyle Blackburn. His book is The Lizard Man. His website is lyleblackburn.com. Next week, we have Aaron Junkins coming on talking about the return of the Nephilim. And I'm so going to kill this name, Don Oscar Miro Cuesta Salvio, talking about ancestral healing of Peru. So until next week, I'm Dr. Rita Louise. This is Just Energy Radio. Be blessed.
Join host Dr. Rita Louise each week at this time for Just Energy Radio. Point your browser